On the whole, I was really impressed with how students answered the 2018 exam. The very best answers were those that managed to tackle all four of the assessment objectives at once in almost every paragraph. So they'd start with a nice, clear comparative argument, back it up with some detail from the text, dig into that quote or that example to think about the writer's craft, and link that to the context. The less successful answers were those that didn't focus on the question so much. So maybe they tell the story a little bit too much, or they're not giving me any detail about the text and what the writer's doing to create meanings.
How do I bring contexts into my answer?
It's important not to treat contexts as if they're separate from the rest of the essay. So make them relevant to the question that you're answering, and it's best not to just learn a chunk of context that you try and put into every essay. You have to pick and choose a bit. People tend to put a little bit much biographical context in, and a little bit's fine as long as it's relevant to the question. But it's not a good idea to just learn a load about your author's life and parrot that out. It's better to have a range of contexts, so little and often is what we would like. Historical context is, I guess, more straightforward for the 19th century texts, because you can think about how society might have changed, for example, attitudes to the roles of women, to religion, to sexuality, and issues like that. With the modern texts, you can still think about historical and social contexts. So perhaps the political climate at the time that The Handmaid's Tale was written, or race in The Lonely Londoners. You can always talk about social attitudes or audience responses, how one audience might have responded to the text, how a modern audience might respond differently. You can think about how a text might fit into genre categories. Or you could think about critical responses, for example, how a feminist or a Marxist critic might interpret the novel. Try to get a range of contexts in. Context doesn't just mean one thing. It should be varied and interesting, hopefully.
What is the best way to select quotes from the novels?
In a way, it's more challenging to select quotes from novels than it is from, say, poems, because there's just so much more to choose from. The golden rule is keep it short. You don't want to waste your time writing out huge, big chunks of text in the exam. The other thing to think about is whether the quotes that you choose will actually enable you to write about the writer's craft. So make sure there's something in there that you can analyse. Once you've chosen your quotes, it's a good idea to focus on the different things that it might mean. Don't just label it with one term and then move on, but dig into the different meanings, what the writer is doing with that quote. And don't try and use the same quotes in every essay. You get this a lot with Wuthering Heights, with The Thousand Splendid Suns, and with Frankenstein, that the same quotes are used again and again. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. They might well be relevant to the question, but ask yourself, is this the best example for the point that I'm making? And if it is, then great, go on, analyse it, go into the detail of it. But if not, maybe think about, is there somewhere else in the novel that would illustrate this point a little bit more clearly or a bit better?
How do I spend less time looking for quotes in the novels during the exam?
The only real way to make it quicker to find quotes in the exam is to know your novels really well. So hopefully by the time you sit the exam, you'll have read both of them several times through, so you'll know exactly what happens where in the novel, and you'll be able to find particular incidents quite quickly. Some students I know like to learn a set of quotations, which is fine, and if that gives you a kind of safety net, it makes you feel a bit more secure going into the exam, fine. But it does reduce your flexibility when it comes to answering the question if you've only got one set of quotes to use. It might be a better approach to focus your revision on maybe learning, rather than single quotes, incidents in the novels, so bits that are particularly descriptive or dramatic, or there's lots you can say about them. So think about parts of the novel that have got a lot of the writer's craft evident in them, and focus your revision on those sections.